A massive alien warship had been drifting in deep space for 273 days. Its distress signal echoed across the galaxy, but no fleet, no empire, and no rescue team answered. Then suddenly, one tiny ship replied, and when the aliens saw who came to repair their ship, they were terrified. The distress signal had been repeating for 273 days out in the silent void between major trade routes, where even automated cargo drones rarely traveled. A once magnificent alien cruiser drifted helplessly. Its engines were dead, its power grid unstable, and its crew had long since accepted a bitter truth: no one was coming. The ship was called the Aurelian Drift, a Valkyrie exploration vessel designed to chart the unknown edges of the Orion Expanse. It had been built to withstand radiation storms, asteroid impacts, and deep space isolation for decades, but it had not been built to survive what had happened. The accident itself had been small. In fact, it had seemed almost insignificant when it occurred 7 months earlier. The ship had crossed a field of microscopic debris left behind by the collision of two ancient comets. The fragments were so tiny that the sensors barely registered them. Most burned away harmlessly against the ship's outer shield. But one fragment no larger than a grain of sand punched through an external maintenance port. That tiny hole caused a cascade of problems. The fragment struck a power distribution relay inside the propulsion synchronization system. The relay didn't explode, it didn't even fail immediately. Instead, it melted just enough to begin misrouting energy. At first, the issue looked like a simple calibration problem. The engineers ran diagnostics, they recalibrated the thrusters, they reset the navigation core. Nothing worked. Then the propulsion rings stopped responding entirely. Then the power grid began fluctuating. Then the ship's artificial intelligence started issuing contradictory commands to multiple systems. Within 2 days, the Aurelian Drift was no longer a functioning starship. It was a drifting metal city with failing systems and a crew of 40 specialists who could not figure out how to fix their own ship. Captain Velis had ordered the distress beacon activated. Immediately, the signal went out across every known emergency frequency. It carried their identification codes, their location, and a request for assistance from any passing vessel. At first, the crew was confident. Surely someone would respond. The Orion Expanse might be remote, but trade routes still passed within a few light years. Rescue fleets, salvage teams, and patrol ships regularly scanned for distress signals. Someone would answer, but weeks passed, then months, every time the beacon repeated its message. Hope faded a little more. Eventually, the crew stopped expecting a reply. Life aboard the drifting cruiser settled into a slow routine of survival. Power was rationed, non-essential systems were shut down. The hydroponic gardens were converted entirely to food production. The Valkyrie were a disciplined species. Panic was rare among them, but even discipline could not erase the quiet fear that spread through the ship. The nearest inhabited system was almost 12 years away using conventional thrusters. Without propulsion, they would never reach it. Captain Velis stood on the dim bridge one long cycle, watching the stars drift slowly across the observation window. The ship rotated slightly each hour as gravitational currents tugged at it. The distress beacon pulsed again, emergency transmission repeating. The communications officer reported in a tired voice. Velis nodded. He had heard the report thousands of times. Continue transmission. The officer hesitated. Captain, if I may speak freely, proceed. No one is coming. The words hung in the air like frozen dust. Velis did not respond immediately. Deep down, every member of the crew already knew that, because in the modern galaxy, rescue was rarely free. Ships answered distress signals when there was profit involved. The Aurelian Drift carried scientific equipment, but no valuable cargo. To most salvage companies, rescuing them would be expensive and inconvenient. The captain finally spoke quietly. We continue transmitting. The officer nodded. The beacon pulsed again into the emptiness, another message thrown into a universe that seemed determined to ignore it. But 2 hours later, something changed. A faint signal appeared on the long-range scanner. At first the communications officer thought it was interference, then the signal repeated, a transmission responding directly to their distress call. The officer straightened suddenly. "Captain, we have a reply." The bridge crew turned in disbelief. "A reply?" Velis asked. Double quotes, "Yes." "Identify the sender." The officer tapped the console, analyzing the incoming data packet. Then his expression shifted to confusion. "Captain, the responding vessel does not appear in any major registry." Velis stepped closer. "Display the identification." The screen filled with a small block of text. "Vessel, wandering spanner class, independent repair craft species, human crew." Once bridge fell silent. Humans. They were relatively new members of the galactic community. Inventive, unpredictable, and widely considered both brilliant and reckless. They were known for one particular skill that most species struggled to understand. Humans could fix almost anything, but they rarely worked within traditional engineering protocols. Their solutions were often unconventional. Velis frowned slightly. "Open communication." The transmission connected with a burst of static. Then a human face appeared on the screen. The man looked tired and shaven, and oddly cheerful. He leaned close to his camera as if examining the alien crew on the other side. "Well," he said casually, "that's one big broken ship." No one spoke for several seconds. Finally Velis cleared his throat. "I'm Captain Velis of the Aurelian Drift. Identify yourself." The human smiled. "Name's Daniel Mercer, independent engineer." "You folks sounded like you were having a rough day." Velis studied him carefully. "You are responding to our distress beacon." "Yep." "You understand the severity of our situation?" Mercer shrugged. "I read the diagnostics packet you attach. That ship of yours has a propulsion grid meltdown, a confused AI, and about 15 different systems arguing with each other." He scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Honestly, it looks kind of fun." The bridge crew exchanged uncertain glances. Velis remained calm. "You believe you can repair our vessel?" Mercer leaned back in his chair. "Well, I won't know until I look at it, but I've seen worse." Velis glanced at the sensor display showing the approaching ship. It was tiny, barely larger than a cargo shuttle. "You are alone?" the captain asked. Mercer nodded. "Just me." "And your ship?" "Old, ugly, and reliable." He grinned. "But it carries every tool I own." Velis hesitated for a moment. Trusting a single human engineer with their survival felt risky, but doing nothing guaranteed death. "Permission granted to dock." Velis said. Mercer snapped his fingers once. "Great. Give me 20 minutes." The transmission ended. Outside the viewing window, a small ship slowly approached the massive drifting cruiser. It looked battered. Its hull carried scars from years of hard work. Paint was chipped away in places, revealing patches of repaired metal beneath. Large mechanical arms were mounted along its sides, clearly designed for maintenance operations. On the nose of the ship, someone had painted a name in bright yellow letters. "Wandering Spanner." The vessel docked with a heavy metallic thud. Minutes later, the airlock opened. Daniel Mercer stepped aboard carrying a scratched metal toolbox. He looked around the alien corridor with obvious curiosity. The Vekari crew members who greeted him were tall, silver-skinned beings with elongated features and luminous blue eyes. Mercer whistled softly. "Nice shape." Chief Engineer Kelleran stepped forward stiffly. "You are the human engineer." "Guilty," Mercer said. Kelleran glanced at the simple toolbox. "That is your equipment, part of it." Kelleran's expression suggested doubt. "Our engineering teams have attempted to repair the propulsion system for months." Mercer shrugged. "Then let's see what you missed." Kelleran clearly disliked that answer, but he gestured for Mercer to follow. They walked through the dim corridors toward the engineering deck. Along the way, Mercer examined everything. He tapped bulkheads with his knuckles. He listened to distant vibrations in the ship's structure. He occasionally stopped to stare at panels as if trying to hear something inside them. Kelleran watched him with growing confusion. "You have not accessed the diagnostic network." Mercer smiled slightly. "Not yet." They finally reached the main engineering chamber. Massive reactor conduits ran through the room like glowing arteries. The propulsion control core sat at the center of the chamber, surrounded by dozens of damaged panels and exposed wiring. Kelleran gestured toward it. "This is where the primary failure began." Mercer sat down his toolbox and opened it. Inside were tools that looked both ordinary and strangely customized. He pulled out a small flashlight and crawled under a console. Kelleran frowned. You cannot diagnose a propulsion collapse with manual inspection. Mercer's voice echoed from beneath the console. Watch me. For the next hour, Mercer wandered through the engineering deck performing what appeared to be random checks. He opened panels. He smelled coolant pipes. He tapped circuits with a screwdriver. The Vakari engineers whispered among themselves. This was not how advanced repairs were conducted. Finally, Mercer stopped beside a cluster of power conduits. He stared at them for several seconds. Then he laughed. Oh wow. Kelleran stepped closer. What have you discovered? Mercer pointed inside the conduit junction there. Kelleran leaned in. At first he saw nothing unusual. Then Mercer reached inside and carefully pulled out a tiny piece of warped metal, a relay component burned almost beyond recognition. Kelleran frowned. That part failed months ago. We replaced it. Immediately, Mercer nodded. Double quotes. Yeah, but that's not the real problem. He pointed deeper into the wiring. That relay melted just enough to send a bad signal through the propulsion synchronization network. Kelleran crossed his arms. That should not disable the entire engine system. Mercer grinned. Normally it wouldn't, but look what happened next. He began tracing wires through multiple subsystems. The engineers followed his explanation. Step by step, the damaged relay had triggered a feedback loop. That loop confused the navigation AI. The AI tried to correct the perceived error. Those corrections sent conflicting commands to the propulsion ring. Each system began adjusting to compensate for the others within hours. The entire propulsion grid was trapped in a recursive error cycle. Kelleran stared at the diagrams Mercer sketched on a nearby console. This is absurd. Mercer shrugged. Welcome to complex systems. Kelleran looked at him carefully. How did you identify this so quickly? Mercer smiled. Because human machines break like this all the time. He pulled a replacement component from his toolbox. It was similar to the damaged relay but not identical. Kelleran immediately noticed. That is not a standard Vakari component. Nope, it will not integrate with our systems. Mercer crouched beside the conduit. Well, if I convince it to. Kelleran watched in alarm as Mercer began installing the component. The human added extra wires. Then a small resistor, then a custom data adapter. This modification violates at least 12 engineering protocols, Kelleran said. Mercer tightened. The final connection, probably more. Kelleran hesitated. Will it work? Mercer stood and wiped his hands. Only one way to find out. An hour later, the entire crew gathered on the bridge. Captain Velas stood beside the propulsion control display. Mercer leaned casually against the wall holding a mug of steaming coffee. Kelleran's voice came over the intercom. Engineering ready. Velas nodded. Begin propulsion restart. Sequence. Power surged through the ship. The reactor flared to life. Energy raced along the repaired conduits. For several tense seconds nothing happened, then the propulsion ring outside the ship began to rotate. Slowly at first, then smoothly, then perfectly. The ship moved, gases filled the bridge, navigation systems recalibrated instantly, velocity indicators flickered to life. After months of drifting, the Aurelian drift was moving again. The crew erupted into stunt celebration. Kelleran's voice came over the intercom again. Propulsion fully functional. Captain Velas turned slowly toward Mercer. You have restored our ship. Mercer shrugged. Just nudge it back in the right direction. Kelleran appeared on the bridge minutes later, still staring at the repair logs. This modification should not work, he said. Mercer grinned. Double quotes. Yeah, but it does. Kelleran studied him with new respect. You humans solve problems differently. Mercer nodded. We grow up fixing broken stuff. Later, as Mercer prepared to return to his small ship, Captain Velas met him near the airlock. You have saved 42 lives, the captain said. Mercer waved a hand. Just doing my job. Velas tilted his head slightly. Why did you respond to our signal when others ignored it? Mercer paused. Then he smiled softly. Because someone had to. He stepped through the airlock. Moments later, the small ship wandering spanner detached from the cruiser. As it drifted away into the stars, the crew of the Aurelian drift watched in silence. They had spent months believing no one would answer their call. But in the end, the one person who came was the least expected of all, a single human engineer with a battered toolbox, and somehow that had been enough.